I couldn't resist when my neighbor invited me to her house, and an uncontrollable desire overtook me. I'm going to tell you a secret that I never imagined I would have the courage to share. My name is Isabel. I always thought I was lucky to be in a stable marriage with Henrique. We've been together for years, and our relationship is built on solid foundations: respect, complicity, and a routine that brings me security. He is a kind, dedicated, and reliable man. I'm well aware that many people would give anything for a marriage like ours, which is why I've never stopped valuing what we have. Our day-to-day life is relaxed. We share tasks, plan trips, and he always remembers to bring me flowers on my birthday. But I have to confess, I'm not a saint. Sometimes I feel a burning desire for other guys. It's not about the love I feel for Henry, or the stability we've built. It's something more human. Sometimes I feel a different spark, a chill in my belly that appears unexpectedly. It might be the smile of a stranger in the street or a quick conversation with a colleague at work. It doesn't last more than a few seconds, but it makes me reflect on the complexity of being who I am. These sensations aren't frequent, but I can't ignore them either. I've never thought of acting on impulse, and, in fact, these sparks end up being a reminder of how much I value what I have with Henry. Still, I can't help but wonder, are these fleeting sensations part of life? Are they just reflections of what we fail to explore? There is no guilt, no regret, just a curiosity that, although fleeting, makes me think about who I am beyond being a wife. Maybe that's what life does. It tests us in small moments, showing us sides of ourselves that we didn't even know existed. It all began simply, almost imperceptibly. Sophie, the new neighbor, arrived with an unpretentious smile and an attitude that immediately caught my attention. She was the kind of person who seemed to carry an aura of her own, as if the world revolved around her. Confident, charming, and with a lightness that made it seem as if nothing could shake her. She attracted glances effortlessly. When I saw her for the first time, I couldn't help but feel a mixture of curiosity and admiration. It was one morning that we spoke for the first time. I was in the garden tending to the plants when she appeared, bringing a cake as a welcome gift for herself, as she joked. "I thought it would be more fun to share than to eat alone," she said, with a smile that would disarm anyone.
Like and subscribe now so you don't miss out on new stories.
I accepted the invitation, and within a few minutes we were sitting on the balcony, sharing trivial stories as if we'd known each other for years. Meetings became frequent. Quick coffees turned into long conversations, filled with laughter and confidences. Sophie had a captivating way of talking about life, as if there were no limits to what was possible. She recounted adventures that seemed straight out of a movie and told us about her travels, daring choices, and how much she valued freedom. At first, I thought it was just admiration. Sophie was everything I wasn't. Spontaneous, fearless, and in love with unpredictability. But as the days went by, I realized there was something more. It was as if her presence awakened something dormant inside me. A curiosity, a desire to understand why she made me feel so different. There were times when I watched her as she spoke, and my heart would race for no apparent reason. It wasn't something I could explain, but I couldn't ignore it either. Her every word seemed to open a door to a part of me that I had never explored. I tried to dismiss these thoughts, labeling them as the fruit of an intense new friendship. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. Sophie wasn't just a neighbor or a friend. She was an enigma who was somehow beginning to occupy a space I didn't know existed. Sophie had a unique way of telling her stories. She spoke with enthusiasm, as if every detail carried an important lesson or a precious memory. During our conversations, I began to realize how different her life was from mine. She talked about the countries she had visited, the risky choices she had made, and above all, how she refused to live up to any expectations other than her own. "I believe that life only makes sense when you live it authentically," she once said, with an intense gaze that seemed to pierce through my own uncertainties. It was impossible not to admire her freedom, her ability to assume who she was without fear of judgment. One afternoon, she casually mentioned that she had been in relationships with both men and women. For her, love and desire were fluid, without barriers or rules. I listened fascinated, but also worried. Sophie seemed to have a courage that I didn't even know existed. Her view of the world moved me, making me question how much of my life I really chose or just accepted as normal. It wasn't that I wanted what she had, but her stories ignited something in me, a silent desire to explore more of who I was. All this took on a new meaning the day I went to her house. As usual, she had called me over for tea and a chat, but when I arrived, something was different. The front door was only propped open, and the silence inside the house was unusual. I entered, calling her name, but no one answered. As I approached the corridor, I saw that the bedroom door was ajar. Before I could think about leaving, the scene before me paralyzed me. Sophie was with a man. They were laughing, but there was an intimacy in the way they touched that left me stunned. I didn't want to get in the way, so I left discreetly, closing the front door carefully. On the way home, my mind was in chaos. The scene shouldn't have affected me, but it did. It wasn't jealousy, and I knew it, but something about the connection between them gripped me. Why did it move me so much? Was it curiosity, desire, or something I still didn't understand? The scene I had witnessed at Sophie's house wouldn't leave my mind. As I walked home, my heart raced, my mind replaying every detail of that moment. The way they laughed, the closeness between them, the freedom with which they connected. I tried to understand why it moved me so much. It wasn't jealousy, of that I was sure. But then, what was it? Curiosity, desire, or just fascination with something so different from everything I knew. That evening, I sat on the sofa with a cup of tea, trying to distract myself. The silence of the house, normally comforting, now seemed to amplify the thoughts I couldn't contain. Why did I feel so restless? I tried to rationalize, to tell myself that it was just the shock of something unexpected, but deep down I knew it wasn't that simple. The next day, while I was doing the dishes, I heard a knock on the door. It was Sophie. She was smiling as usual, but there was something different about the look in her eyes, as if she knew something that I didn't know how to explain. "I saw you yesterday," she said, with a calmness that made my heart stop for a moment. I felt my face heat up, the words catching in my throat as I tried to reply. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. It was a mistake," I stammered, unable to hold her gaze for long. Sophie just laughed, that light, carefree laugh that was so typical of her. "Relax, Isabel. Everyone's curious sometimes," she said, leaning against the doorframe. Her voice bore no trace of judgment, just an acceptance that disconcerted me. I tried to change the subject, but Sophie seemed determined not to let it go unnoticed. "I like your honesty," she continued, her tone softer now. "There's no need to be ashamed. Life is made up of moments like this, where we come across the unexpected and have to deal with what it brings out in us." I didn't know what to say. His way of facing everything so naturally made me uncomfortable, but it also made me admire his courage to talk about things I couldn't even admit to myself. After she left, I reflected on her words. Maybe she was right. Maybe it was just curiosity, but deep down, something told me it was more than that. As we talked, Sophie looked straight into my eyes with an enigmatic smile and asked the question that left me paralyzed. "Would you have the courage to take part in something like this?" For a moment, I didn't know what to say. The shock left me speechless, and all I could do was look away, my heart racing. His voice was light, but there was an implicit challenge in every word. "You don't have to answer now," he continued, as if he had read my mind. "Just think. Sometimes what limits us is the fear of allowing ourselves to be." After she left, the question echoed inside me. I had never considered something so far out of my comfort zone. Could it be possible? The day seemed to drag on at an unbearable pace. Sophie's question ran through my mind like an endless echo. I tried to distract myself, but with every pause, there it was. Would you have the courage? It was an unsettling mixture of fear and curiosity, an internal battle between the Isabel I knew and another I was only just beginning to understand. While doing mundane tasks, I found myself imagining what it would be like. Each possibility seemed to open a new portal inside me. It wasn't just about Sophie or what she proposed. It was about a deep desire to break through the barriers that, until then, I had accepted without question. Still, the fear whispered insistently, what if I regretted it? What if I crossed a line I couldn't get back from? When the day finally came to an end, I made a decision. It was as if ignoring it was riskier than facing the unknown. I picked up my cell phone, and with trembling fingers, sent Sophie a message. "I want to talk." We met at her house that same evening. She opened the door with a serene smile, as if she already knew what I was going to say. We sat on the sofa, and my hands kept fiddling with the ring I was wearing. I was nervous, but determined. "I'm willing to take part," I confessed, feeling my voice tremble. "But on one condition. Everything has to be kept absolutely secret." Sophie didn't hesitate. "Of course," she replied, her tone calm, almost reassuring. "This is between us, and only between us. It's always been that way." I felt a mixture of relief and anxiety when I heard this. I was about to enter uncharted territory, something that made me feel alive in a way I didn't know was possible. Sophie didn't press. She just smiled with that confident way that always baffled me. From that moment on, I knew there was no turning back. I had made a choice, and as frightening as it was, it also filled me with an energy I had never experienced before. The days leading up to the meeting were a mixture of anxiety and excitement that seemed to grow by the minute. Sophie kept her promise of secrecy, which gave me a fragile but necessary security. Even so, my mind was a whirlwind. Every detail seemed more important than usual. What to wear, how to act, and even how to deal with the consequences of something I wasn't even sure what it would be like. On the night of the date, I stood in front of the mirror for longer than I'd like to admit. I chose clothes that made me feel confident, but without looking like I was trying too hard. The light fabric of the dress caressed my skin, and the perfume I always wore seemed to have a different scent that night, as if it were loaded with new meanings. When Sophie came to pick me up, her quick look of approval gave me a little more courage. We got into the car, and the drive to the venue was uneventful, punctuated by light conversation. I knew she was trying to calm me down, but inside, my heart seemed to be hammering at a pace that was impossible to ignore. When we arrived, the atmosphere surprised me. The house was elegant but cozy, with soft lighting that created an intimate atmosphere. There was music in the background, something soft, almost imperceptible. Sophie held my hand briefly before introducing me to someone else, a man whose presence was as confident as hers. He smiled, a disarming gesture that made me relax a little. The first few moments were strange, but Sophie was by my side, guiding every step naturally. The energy in the room was unlike anything I had ever known, but it didn't feel threatening. It was as if I was entering a completely new world, but in a way that made me feel safe. As the evening progressed, I began to notice something unexpected. The complicity between the three of us was palpable. There was laughter, conversations that flowed naturally, and a connection that seemed to grow with every moment. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel the need to control everything around me. I just let things happen. I knew I was crossing a line, but instead of fear, I felt a sense of freedom that I had never experienced before. That night showed me that sometimes stepping outside of what we know can be the only way to discover who we really are. That night unfolded in a way I could never have imagined. Sitting there, surrounded by an energy that seemed to pulsate in the air, I realized something surprising. I was at ease. It was as if, for the first time in a long time, I had given myself permission to explore who I was beyond the role of wife, friend, or neighbor. Every interaction during the encounter was charged with a subtle but undeniable intensity. It wasn't just about desire, although that was there, but about the freedom to feel, to be vulnerable, to experience something that challenged everything I believed I knew about myself. Sophie, with her magnetic presence, seemed to know exactly how to steer each moment, and he, the man who shared the space with us, was as respectful as he was intriguing. As the night progressed, I was seized by a sense of discovery that was both frightening and liberating. It was like opening a door to a side of me that had always been there, but which I had never had the courage to explore. It wasn't just about the experience itself, but about what it represented, the breaking down of barriers that I had imposed on myself for so long. When I finally left the house, I felt the cool night air on my skin like a kind of awakening. Sophie walked me to the door, and with that serene smile, asked me if I was all right. I nodded, unable to hide the confusion in my eyes. The next morning, while we were having coffee in the kitchen of her house, she brought up the subject I knew would come up. "We need to talk about yesterday," she said, with the direct tone I already knew so well. I agreed, knowing that it was important to clarify the boundaries. "It was something unique," I began, choosing my words carefully. "Something I needed to experience, but I don't want it to become part of my routine. I value what I have with Henry, and that needs to remain a secret." Sophie listened carefully, without interrupting, and nodded at the end. Don't worry, that's between us. I've always respected your boundaries, Isabel, and that won't change.
This story doesn't end here. Listen to it all by clicking on the exclusive playlist on the right, or click on the video on the left and listen to the best story on the channel.
Their respect and understanding brought me immediate relief. Despite everything, I knew there was still a lot to process. Something inside me had changed, and although the surface of my life might seem unchanged, what I felt that night was impossible to forget. Over the next few days, my routine resumed its usual rhythm. Henrique and I shared the housework. We had dinner together as usual, and our conversations were light and full of companionship. On the outside, everything looked the same, but inside me, something had changed profoundly. It was as if I had opened a door that I could no longer close. I began to observe myself more. I noticed small gestures and choices that used to be part of who I was, but now seemed to carry new meanings. I felt more confident, as if I had discovered a side of myself that I had kept hidden. This confidence, however, was accompanied by a dilemma that wouldn't leave my head. How far was I willing to go? My friendship with Sophie continued, but now there was a complicity between us that had never existed before. Every meeting brought a mixture of relief and tension. On the one hand, it was good to be close to her, knowing that we shared something so intimate. On the other, the secret weighed heavy. Not because I regretted it, but because it required a constant balance between what we were experiencing and what my life with Henrique represented. Sophie never pushed, and that was part of what made it so intriguing. She seemed to respect my limits, but at the same time always knew how to leave the possibility of more in the air. Our conversations were deeper now, often touching on subjects I would never dare discuss with anyone else. She was a window onto a world that I had ignored, but which was now impossible not to consider. At night, alone in bed while Henrique slept next to me, thoughts consumed me. What exactly did I want? There were times when all I wanted was to forget, to erase that night from my memory and go back to the way things were before. But at other times, the idea of exploring more of what Sophie had introduced me to seemed irresistible. I knew I was at a crossroads, torn between the comfort of a stable life and the thrill of an unknown that seemed both attractive and dangerous. Each choice came with its own consequences, and the weight of those decisions seemed to grow every day. Sophie, in her serene way, once told me, "It's not a question of choosing between two paths. Sometimes, the right path is the one you haven't discovered yet." Her words echoed in my mind whenever I thought about the future. So I asked myself, what would you do if you were me? Should I limit myself to the security of what I know, or allow this new facet of my personality to take me beyond what I ever imagined? This is the question that consumes me, and that I leave for you to ponder. After all, life always finds ways to surprise us, doesn't it?
Don't let this opportunity pass you by. On the left, I've separated an exclusive video for you. On the right, I've left a playlist with videos you like. Click on the screen now and choose.